Jose, we made it, man. We're on YouTube.
Here
We're
we
on the
go. Here we go.
TV. Mom, I'm on TV. What's up, everybody? So, this is Bigger Than the Game with Deremy and Jose, and we're a sports history podcast, and we want to welcome y'all to our first real YouTube video. So, we're on everywhere you can get podcasts, but we're also, bringing out and scoping out for our YouTube channel. So, we just had an episode recently on Frank Thomas, Jose, and really fun doing it. But
Yeah.
someone who's a good friend of ours and a really big supporter of the show. There's no better guest we would want to have on our first YouTube video than this person.
Yeah, we talked about it a little, a little earlier yesterday on how, we wanted to, tell all the listeners, right, like our perspective on such a great and amazing player like Frank Thomas. But, we also talked about on the episode, like, how did Chicago look at Frank Thomas, right? Like they had a lot going on in that time, right, with the Bulls and later on Sammy Sosa and all that good stuff. But, we wanted some insight, right? And then, like you mentioned, like our friend Jack reached out to us and wanted to provide some of that insight. So we're very excited. Again, this is our first real kickoff episode on YouTube, but, we couldn't think of anyone else to be on the show with us. So this is our dear friend, Jack Silverstein. Jack, what's going on, man?
Jack, what's up, man?
What's up, guys? How are you? Appreciate this. Excited to do it.
Absolutely. This is great, man. We Jack is someone you got to follow him at ReadJack on Twitter, because if you want anything, definitely, sports history, but Chicago sports history, Jack's the guy to listen to, talk to, hear. Great read, great writer. So, it's been great getting to know him these past couple years, and for talking about someone who we feel doesn't get the due that he deserves, the big hurt, Frank Thomas. We wanted to hear from Jack, a Chicagoan, and give that perspective of, did he, and are we missing it? Or if he didn't, then why not?
Right.
Yeah, so you guys, as always, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to help you kick off Bigger Than the Game on YouTube. That's dope. You guys, as always, did a great job. And one of the things that I really like about your show, among the many things, is that when you do touch upon Chicago topics, I feel like I learned something about my teams because I'm seeing them from this case, an outsider's perspective. So, for example, when you had your show, and I think you did did you do a standalone piece on the 85 Bears, or was it a piece on Buddy Ryan?
On the 85 Bears.
You did a standalone piece on the 85 Bears, but you've also done enough on Buddy Ryan and on Randall that I feel like there are little bits in there. There was a point where you guys were talking about feeling like Dan Hampton was overrated. And it's interesting because now we're getting this push to get Steve McMichael into the Hall of Fame, and who's battling ALS, and it's terrible. And he was never someone who I thought of as a Hall of Famer, but then looking again at his numbers and then also talking to some older sports fans and being like, who did you feel was most important? And the way that you guys talked about, where you view Dan Hampton, or there are people who think Wilbur Marshall was more important in that 1 year than Singletary, even though Singletary clearly had the better career. All that stuff is really interesting. And so I love hearing, the perspective that you guys bring on Chicago. But I did want to jump in and get some Chicago perspective to the Frank Thomas conversation. And the question for anyone who is tuned in now but didn't hear the podcast, but you should definitely, I've been waiting to say this, check the archives.
Check them, Jack. Tell them.
All right. Way to go, Jack.
Okay. So you should check out the full Frank Thomas podcast, and the driving question of that one was, why is Frank Thomas underrated? Why was he under-discussed, both at the time when he played and now? And I think that there are three big reasons. So I want to kind of lay out everything, because a lot of as I was planning for this and as I was thinking, just when I was listening to the show originally, I was like, oh, it's this, but then some of them overlap.
Right.
Okay.
So I want to kind of lay out all of them, and I want to talk about them the Chicago angle, and then we can and then hit me with questions and talk about anything else. But to me, here are the reasons. I think it starts with three big reasons of why Frank Thomas was underrated then and underrated now. And the first is that he's only a hitter. And you guys made the point, like, when I say only a hitter, I don't want to diminish what he did at the plate, because he was a guy who hit for high average. He didn't just sneak up over 300. I mean, he was hitting consistently 320, 330. He won a batting title, but he was also a power hitter. He was a slugger at a time when MLB was defined offensively by sluggers. So when you thought at the time about who are the sluggers, it wasn't like, oh, he's pretty good. It was like Barry, Junior, Frank, Albert Bell, Wangan, and those were the guys. And then a little later, obviously, Sammy McGuire, although he had faded a little bit in the mid-90s. We'll get to that. But those were the guys who were considered the sluggers. And Frank was one of those people. He had the Sports Illustrated cover before the strike. Frank Thomas and Ken Griffey Jr. standing back to back, holding their bats,
Right.
and said two powerful reasons to continue playing baseball or to keep playing baseball or whatever the thing was. Two powerful reasons. It was clearly not about star power. It was about what these guys do at the plate from a home run perspective. And you mentioned Ken Griffey Jr. and the home run derby, and you mentioned Frank Thomas and the home run derby. So he was a power hitter. He also hit for average. He won a batting title at the time, at the height of his being a power hitter. It was very different than A-Rod winning a batting title, probably before he started juicing and became, a guy who was getting 50 home runs. Very different from Barry Bonds being a big home run guy, but then getting his batting title also later in his career when he was juicing. As I always say, Barry Bonds, best hitter I ever saw off steroids, best hitter I ever saw on steroids. But Frank Thomas, he could do it from the plate in every way. So I don't want to diminish that, but what I mean when I say he was just a hitter, or only a hitter, is that once he wasn't at the plate, he didn't give you a lot in an elite sense. He didn't do much on the bases, and he wasn't doing much defensively. And obviously he transitioned later in his career to being a designated hitter. So he was never a star on the base paths the way that Junior was, or the way that Barry was. He was never a star defensively at his position. And so,
But I
being
do
just a hitter, being an average hitter. I do want to
jump in though, Jack, because
yeah, go ahead. And this is just reason number one.
Yeah, but absolutely. But you mentioned a McGuire, there and other people. There's certain people,
Juan Gonzalez,
who weren't known for that defense, but still got that pub. Still kind of, especially you look at it, first base is a position that no one really cares about defense, and because then Keith Hernandez should be in the Hall of Fame.
Right. Absolutely. But now we get to point number two. And point number two is that Frank didn't have any flair. There was nothing in his game that had flair or style. You talk about Ken Griffey Jr.'s swing, and we can all picture that beautiful, just one of those swings that you practice. Frank's swing, Frank always looked like he was about to tumble out of the box on the way to first base. He kind of had that leaning, lurching swing, and
arms flailing everywhere.
Now he could put the ball anywhere that he wanted. He could put it obviously out of the ballpark, but there was nothing. There was nothing supernatural. There was nothing. Someone tweeted a couple of years ago, Chicago guy Ross Reed. Shout out to Ross. Who were the you had to be there athletes of your life? And Frank, I made a list of the top 10 you had to be there athletes. And you had to be there is defined by someone who you can't tell the story of this person just through the numbers. But Frank, you almost can. He wasn't really anything outside of the numbers. Like, you can kind of tell the whole picture because he didn't have Sammy's hop. He didn't have Junior's smile or Junior's backwards hat. He didn't have someone, he wasn't like, someone like Andrew Jones in the outfield where, yeah, it's just recorded as an out, but like you had to watch him, or Torrey Hunter, or, he wasn't like Ichiro at the plate. He didn't have anything extra to his game. Everything that you want to know about Frank shows up in the box score. There was no additional flair. So that made it easy to kind of underrate him. And you guys said, like, he's the only first ballot Hall of Famer who you'd be like, all right, yeah, first ballot.
Yeah, like
with nothing extra.
Yeah.
Right. And then the third reason, and this is the Chicago part, is that the White Sox, no matter how well they're doing, will always be disrespected. They'll be disrespected nationally. I remember when the Cubs were in the World Series, ESPN ran a graphic, and this happens more often than not. ESPN ran a graphic of like all of the Chicago championships since 1985. So Bears in 85, 6 Bulls titles, 3 Hawks titles. And they didn't have the White Sox up there in 05. Or it was like when the World Series, when Game 3 of the 2016 World Series came around, and they were like, oh, this is the first World Series game in Chicago since the Cubs in 1945. And it's like, no, not only were the White Sox there in 05 and they won it, they were there in 59. Like, there have been 2.
Right.
So that happens all the time, but it also kind of happens in the city because Chicago fandom, and I heard you guys mentioning this and trying to figure out like where the splits. So this is how Chicago fandom works. And the Sky have put a little bit of a wrench into this because now the Sky have really popped up with popularity because of championship and how great they are. And then there's also soccer. We have soccer teams, but basically it breaks down to this. Everyone in Chicago is a Bears fan. And then you have one United Center team and you have one baseball team.
Okay.
There's nobody who's as equally a Bulls and a Hawks fan because you're kind of either really into hoops or you're really into hockey. And when one of those teams is doing well, obviously everybody is excited and there's no like bandwagon thing because you get to root for both.
Yeah, it's your hometown team. Yeah.
It's your hometown team. But the White Sox and the Cubs are not your hometown team. They're part of the city, and it's like you can't claim both. And that's one of those Chicago controversies. So now I'm a fan. I'm a Cubs fan, but I went through a stage in the early 90s where I was a White Sox fan because baseball was not as big in my family as it was in the family of my best friend. We were a Bears family and a Bulls family, and we were a little less baseball. So I've never had a problem supporting the Sox. And I always feel like these are my brothers and sisters at Soldier Field.
Right.
Just they're over at the Cell. They're over at Comiskey over the summer. And so their happiness is my happiness. Like, I'm happy for them. Just as if Philly does well, I'm happy for you guys. Mm-hmm. So I never had that White Sox beef. And in fact, a dear friend of mine, my brother Rob, a decade ago when we were all doing music, and he was a MC, and he had a song, White Sox Fitted. It was about White Sox, the symbol, White Sox fitted hat, turned to the back. And
it's a great hat. It's a great hat.
So I still rep my White Sox fitted shirt for young G. That's right. And even at that point, when the White Sox had changed their logo in the early 90s, and then you've got it as this huge part of pop culture. You've got it in the Nothing But a G Thing video. Mm-hmm. And even that didn't make Frank Thomas jump into that level of superstardom, not locally and not nationally. So I want to break down the Chicago element, and I want to kind of walk through year by year, because the big piece you mentioned at the beginning, but the big piece you didn't mention in your show is MJ.
Oh, so MJ's a big
MJ
part of this.
Is a huge, huge part of this. So let's look at what was going on 1990 to 2005 just in Chicago sports. So you've got MJ by 1988 is arguably the best player in the NBA and the biggest athlete on the planet. It's him, Tyson, Montana, Magic, whoever else. So you've got that in your own city. So Frank is already the best player on the number 2 baseball team in one city. You mentioned McGuire, you mentioned Juan Gonzalez. Those guys are the number 1 player on the number 1 baseball team in their city. So St. Louis is a small market, but that's what they have. You know, the Rams weren't.
They're great
the Rams
baseball
weren't there.
fans.
Yeah, the Rams weren't there until the middle of the '90s. So when McGuire jumped off in '97 and then '98, the Rams were still building up with Dick Vermeil. And check the archive. And
absolutely.
And then you've got Juan Gonzalez playing for the Rangers, and so he's their best player. You know, he was bigger than, I guess he was probably equal with Pudge, but I would say he was their best player.
He was their best player. Pudge was a great player too, but I would say he was their best player.
Yeah, okay, all right. So you've got Juan Gon sort of owning that market. You've got Ken Griffey Jr., even with Unit and later A-Rod, you've got Ken Griffey Jr. owning his market. You've got Barry Bonds, whether in Pittsburgh or San Francisco, owning his market. So Frank didn't even own, from a baseball standpoint, you couldn't even say he owned his market. When the White Sox started to really get good, so 91, 92, and then obviously 93, they win the AL West, he starts to get overshadowed a little bit even on his own team, because you had Blackjack McDowell, who won the AL Cy. You know, you've got Robin Ventura is a bigger personality than Frank. Ozzie Guillen's a bigger personality than Frank. And then think about
Bo Jackson.
There you go. So who else did the White Sox land? So I sent this over to Jeff Pearlman, I don't know, some months ago as he was researching his Bo book, which comes out. And this was from I think this was from the Tribune, but this was from MJ's retirement, October 6th, 1993. And it's looking at athlete rankings based on earnings. What is this? Earnings, product influence, and overall recognition. And MJ is number one in all three categories. But in this category, athlete influence ratings in 1991, Bo Jackson is number 2. And he's number 5 in athlete recognition. So Frank Thomas is now the second most recognizable player on his own team. Because Bo, this is the time of pro stars. And they had to pick 3 athletes to sum up the 4 major American sports. And they go MJ for basketball, Wade for hockey, and Bo for football and for baseball.
I got to say something here, though, Jack. I gotta jump in. Because, like you said earlier, and we said on our podcast, there's a time, though, despite Bo coming in, you know, and all that stuff, and I totally get it. MJ has his run deep into June, so that then, you know, pushes that interest. It stops the interest in going to baseball a little bit longer because the Bulls are going deep into June. So that's a great point. But Frank Thomas, one of the few guys, had his own video game. Frank Thomas on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Frank Thomas is getting that pub too now.
His own sneakers. Yeah, not a lot of baseball guys did at the time.
He's getting that pub, but it never totally translated. He didn't have the same personality as Ken Griffey Jr. He didn't have the controversy. He wasn't controversial either. So Barry had the controversy, and Junior had the star power. And, you know, when you think about guys who are like professional hitters, that tag went to the guys who were winning batting titles every year. It went to Tony Gwynn and Wade Boggs. So if you think about how you fill any person, you fill a lane, and you get known as being the top in a given lane. Frank was never the top in any lane. He was not the best known player on the White Sox in the year that they finally went to the playoffs. He was not the best known player in Chicago. He plays for the second best known baseball team in Chicago. And listen, the Sox get disrespected. I'm not saying that this is right. I'm just saying it is. The Cubs overshadow the White Sox.
But let me ask you. So in that ratio, for Cubs and Sox, what is it? Is it 80-20? Is it that bad? Like, how bad is it?
No. It's technically it's even, because technically you're either a Sox fan or a Cubs fan.
It's even.
Technically, yeah. But here's the problem: the Cubs were a draw just based on Wrigley Field. Even when the White Sox went ahead and built New Comiskey, they still couldn't outdraw the Cubs. And then what happens immediately after the White Sox build New Comiskey? The whole model for what your new ballpark is going to look like changed with Camden Yards. Within like 2 years, everyone was looking at New Comiskey going like, this sucks. Like, why are you still so big? Like, why don't you feel like a neighborhood park the way that you get it in Baltimore? And oh, by the way that you get it, over on Addison. So the White Sox could never really catch on in a national way. And that combined with Frank he was never the number one slugger, but he was never the number one guy who you would think of when you think of someone who hit for average. Like, there's that great segment, I think it was Peter Gammons did it, and he interviewed Tony Gwynn and Greg Maddux about what it was like to square off against each other. It was mid-1990s, awesome clip. And these are two guys who were considered tacticians because you had the power guys, you had Randy and Clemens and Pedro. Pedro was more of a tactician as well, but he still could, go high 90s.
Both.
Oh yeah.
He was both. Exactly. And then you had the power guys, and then you had the hitters. And you never really thought of Frank when you thought of like professional hitter. He wasn't that first guy you thought of. Like, they would never have done this video. Forget about the fact that obviously Frank and Maddux weren't in the same league, so they weren't going to be facing each other. Let's say they were. You would never make that video. They would never think to call Frank over Tony Gwynn if they're going to have the craft of baseball and what the at bat is like. You would never call Frank up for that feature over Tony Gwynn, or probably even Wade Boggs,
which is a crime.
So
that's the crime, though. That's the crime.
But that's the reality.
That's the crime, though, because the guy in '94, and the thing is, we talk about what Griffey was doing in '94, the Expos. Who I love that Expos team.
That was a great team.
That Expos jacket. I still rock my Expos winter jacket. Love them. But we talk about Boggs and Gwynn were hovering around 400. Frank Thomas was about to get a triple crown.
Right. He was hitting 371, I think, when the strike happened. It's incredible.
Okay, so now let's look at the 93 Sox. Let's keep running through this from a Chicago perspective. So the 93 White Sox, like I said, Frank is incredible, wins the MVP, but you also have Bo Jackson, and Bo Jackson is the one who hit the key home run that helped the White Sox clinch the AL West.
Right.
Then you go into the playoffs,
and this is
bad.
And
this is bad. What happens during the ALCS?
That's bad.
MJ retires.
That's a bad one. One is a bad one. That's a bad one.
So MJ throws out the first pitch, and then the rumors start spreading in the game that he's going to retire the next day. And reporting in the game isn't on Frank and Bo and Ozzy and all these guys, Robin and Rock Reigns and One Dog. It's not on all these guys. It's on, they didn't let Carlton Fisk come to the game without a ticket.
Yeah.
Yep.
And MJ's going to retire.
Now, Jose, this is why we do it, because we have talked about the 93 Blue Jays on our podcast. Check the archives.
Check them.
But, it's funny. We know that MJ did retire during that, but it's interesting. That's why we love doing it. That's an interesting point, like that MJ does, not on purpose probably, but take shine away from Frank and maybe as a team their best season in Frank's run by retiring during the ALCS.
Yeah, and I knew Jack was going to throw in these Chicago Bulls and Jordan anyway in this episode, because it's just we have to do that. But no, that's a great point that I overlooked. I'll be very honest, because again, that was Frank at the moment of his career. That was his highest peak. MVP season, playoff team. On national TV at this point, and then now the biggest story in all sports, even in news, like that was leading a lot of newscasts, like Michael Jordan retiring. I'm sure in Chicago that was for sure.
It was dominating.
Right.
It was dominating in Chicago. It was dominating all over the world. It was a global story. So then the White Sox lose the first two games of the ALCS at home. MJ retires the morning of Game 2. So now it's just MJ's gone.
Yeah.
Now we can't focus on anything else because it's like, what in the hell? We're getting ready to go for a four-peat. This is a month before the NBA season started. Now it's like we got to sign Pete Myers. Like, what? Scotty's the man. Like, what in the hell is happening? Sox are down 0-2. Forget about them. They come back. They tie that series. Then they lose Game 5, and then you come back to Chicago for Game 6, and I'm looking at the date now, October 12th, and they lose that game too. So they lose every game at Comiskey. And then it's over. And then what is the next biggest news about the White Sox after they lose the ALCS? And then obviously at whatever point, because they probably did, MVP award was probably announced after the season at that time. So Frank wins the MVP at some point after that. What is the next biggest news about the White Sox?
Oh, you got me. Yeah, you got me.
Minor league outfielder Michael Jeffrey Jordan.
Good point.
January of 1994.
Very interesting.
That's the next biggest news about the
Sox.
Sox.
Yeah. That's all they talked about with the White Sox is when was Jordan coming up? What is Jordan doing? Like it was all that Sports Center stuff was in the minor leagues with the White Sox.
All right, so January of 94, first week of January, MJ is announced he's signing a minor league contract with the White Sox. Now, your MJ beat is also your White Sox beat.
Yep.
Very interesting. All right, Bo Jackson leaves, but Jordan comes. So now he's going through spring training. The Bulls have dipped a little bit. Now they're a surprise team. Scotty goes and wins All-Star MVP around this time. The Hawks are starting to dip a little bit. This is right before Northwestern football kicked up. The White Sox are going to be the team in 94. But in the meantime, the Sox and the Cubs link up at Wrigley for the annual Crosstown Classic because this is before interleague play. So every year the Cubs and Sox played a charity game. And the big story at Wrigley Field is Michael Jordan. Not defending AL MVP Frank Thomas, but MJ.
Wow.
No, it's a good point.
So he's out in his beautiful black number 45 jersey. This is the only time where in a game that mattered he actually wore a Sox jersey because otherwise he was in his minor league jersey. So he's in his White Sox jersey and he's surrounded by cameras and Harry Carey's interviewing him. He's at Wrigley Field. No one's talking about what Frank Thomas is over here doing. They're talking about Mike. So now Mike, who has already overshadowed Frank from 90 to 93 just because of who he is on the basketball court, now has literally invaded his space and is overshadowing him on the diamond. Now, MJ was very deferential to all the baseball players and wanted only to listen to them and learn from them. And he talked about how he was in awe of what they could do, what Frank, Ozzie, all these guys. And Frank was one of the ball players who embraced Jordan. So there was a real level of respect and mutual admiration between MJ and Frank. So I'm not saying that there was anything like Frank felt dismissed or anything like that. But in terms of like, when you think about, all right, when you ask the question, why is he underrated? Why was he overshadowed? His number one athletic competitor in his own city is now on his own team.
Which is very unique.
In his organization.
It is unique.
Right.
It is unique. But I still feel like...
All right, so now,
you can have
94.
Both. You can have both. You know what I mean?
If he was Ken Griffey Jr., you could have both. But on a guy who already doesn't have the big personality, doesn't have the flair, he's not running the bases. He's not making great stabs at the plate now, or at first base. Now, here's another part of this. You guys are going to say this is insane, but I'm going to tell you it's true. Like I said, the Cubs-White Sox thing is 50-50 in terms of fandom because you're typically not going to find people who rock both. And anybody who does rock both, who legitimately... See, I'm a Cubs fan. I'd never say I'm a White Sox fan. I'm just not a White Sox hater. I support the success of the White Sox. Like, awesome. Like, go for it. I'm happy about that. I'm not a White Sox fan, so I don't have that sin in Chicago of like, oh, pick a team.
Yeah, so it's not like Yankees Mets. It's kind of what I'm getting. Like if you're a Yankees fan, you cannot be like You do not like Mets fans, like, or the Mets
No, it
organization.
is. No, it is like that. So
Okay.
there are people who are like, oh, I root for both teams equally because I care about Chicago teams.
No, you
And
can't.
people are like, that's bullshit.
Yeah, you can't.
I don't say that. I don't say I have them equally. But what I do say is like I support the White Sox in the sense that it doesn't bother me when they do well, and I want them to do well because my best friends are White Sox fans.
Right,
like,
and it's good for the city, and it's great for the city.
And it's good for the city, exactly. So I want the White Sox to do well. And I was happy when the White Sox won in 05, and I'm a big 05 White Sox guy just because like that team was incredible and it was in our backyard. And we'll get to the 05 White Sox as well. But going back, it's not even. But because of Wrigley Field and because of perceptions around crime in the differing neighborhoods, and also because of the activities, Wrigley is nestled right in the middle of neighborhood streets, and you can just be walking, and all of a sudden there's Wrigley, and the location. Nothing has really changed about how the streets are laid out. It's literally in the middle of like city blocks. Whereas yeah, you can walk up to Comiskey or to the Cell, like you can walk up to it like any ballpark, but you can kind of feel it because it's got parking around it. Like you can feel like, oh, something's changing here. Oh, I see, there's a major league ballpark. And so because of all these elements, Comiskey never had that like hangout aspect in the way that Wrigley did. People didn't come from out of town and be like, oh, I got to make sure I go down to 35th and Shields and hit a Sox game. But they did do that with, I got to go to the Sears Tower, I got to see the lake, and I got to see Wrigley Field. And part of that is access, and that access is also tied to Chicago's terribly segregated, and part of the segregation comes out in the way that the train systems are built, and the way that the freeway system is built, and the way that so all that stuff factors in. But so for a number of reasons, Wrigley Field is a draw on its own, in a way that the Cell, Comiskey, whatever, is not. So when I say it's 50-50, it's 50-50 in terms of fandom, but it's like 80-20 in terms of attention.
Okay.
There's way more attention paid to the Cubs. And so getting back to that Cubs White Sox thing and like how was Frank overshadowed? So he's overshadowed by the sluggers. He's overshadowed by the guys who are winning batting titles every single year. He's overshadowed by other baseball players in other cities. He's overshadowed by Michael Jordan in his own city and eventually on his own team. And the Cubs first baseman was Mark Grace. So no one ever was like, Mark Grace is better than Frank Thomas, but it was kind of like, but he's a big personality. And also, you mentioned like you don't have to defend your position, but the guys who do, there's sort of a different category for them.
And he was a great first.
Mark Grace was winning Gold Gloves. He was making some All-Star teams. And when you think about like hitting for average, who has the most hits in MLB in the 1990s? Mark Grace.
Yeah, he was a great player. Mark Grace was really, really good.
So it was like when you guys talk about, Emmett and Barry versus Thurman Thomas. And I always said, you would never say that Thurman was better. All right, I don't want to say.
Be careful, Jack.
Be careful, Jack. For people who are following us on YouTube, you got to check our archives because that is a running debate. And Jack's joined in on Twitter, but it's a running debate between Jose and I. Jose is a Thurman Thomas guy. I'm an Emmitt Smith guy. So just to fill in our YouTube people who haven't listened to the podcast yet.
So where this fits in is that, and I loved Thurman Thomas, okay? I would have never said Thurman Thomas is a better running back than Emmett or Barry.
Correct.
But Thurman gave you aspects that those guys didn't give you. And as a result of that, as someone watching the Bills, I would have never been like, oh, well, it's too bad they have Thurman instead of Emmett or Barry. You never felt like, oh, this is a downgrade because Thurman could do things that those guys couldn't do. So even though I always thought like you had Emmett and Barry at the top, Thurman was the clear-cut number 3 in the running back rankings, but he was also doing things that number 1 and number 2 were not doing because they were not the threat as a receiver that he was. And so he had this kind of all-around aspect to him because, he had, I think the number is that no one's ever led the NFL in yards from scrimmage 3 years in a row.
3 years in a row.
Except for Thurman, who did it 4 years in a row.
Correct.
So what I'm saying is that no one would have ever said Mark Grace was as good as Frank Thomas. Not in a million bajillion years. But when you were looking, we would always do this, like, who's got between the two teams? Who's got the best second baseman in the city? You're like, all right, that's Rhino. Who's got the best third baseman in the city? All right, that's Robin. Who's got the best outfielders in the city? Oh, well, Rock Raines and Bo and Ellis Burks and One Dog. Okay, that's the White Sox. Or later, like, oh, all right, that's Sammy. And who's got the best catcher in the city? I don't know. That kind of went back and forth. But it was like, who's got the best first baseman in the city? You would definitely say Frank. But Cubs fans were able to say, yeah, but our guy plays better defense.
What? That's still.
I would have been like, I don't care.
Yeah, I would have been like, what?
I'm just explaining.
No, I hear you.
I would have said let Mark Grace carry the Cubs into the playoffs then, like Frank did at a time where you mentioned 93 and there was no wild card. So you had to either win that division to get in. Let Mark Grace go to do that. And no disrespect to Mark Grace, but
I'm just saying. I'm just saying there were kind of a ton of reasons. I think there are some very high level reasons why Frank is overshadowed. But then, like, even in this smaller, very niche aspect of being a Chicago baseball fan and being like, well, how do you compare them at third base? So, because the Tribune, probably sometimes, they would always do like the best Chicago play. Like, they would make the all Chicago baseball team.
Yeah.
Like that would be a feature at some point in the summer. And while you were always going to say Frank Thomas, that honorable mention would be like, oh, by the way, Mark Grace is hitting 317. It hasn't made an error. He's going to win another Gold Glove. It was like, and that could have been another way for Cubs fans maybe to stick it to White Sox fans. But there was some level of legitimacy there. All right, so now.
And I can even understand this, Jack, right, real quick.
Yeah.
Because even like your baseball historian, right, like your old school guy, are going to probably really look at like those the Mark Graces of the world and be like, no, you got to be an all around player. Like, you got to field, you got to also hit. But then you have like at that time, like the game was changing, right? So now you have more specialized guys like Frank Thomas, who was coming in and after 97 started DHing predominantly. And no, so I can see that argument happening. You know what I mean? Even though all three of us think it's like a ludicrous conversation, but I can see where like an old school guy can be like, no, like this guy's winning Gold Gloves. That kind of like evens them out a little bit. I don't know. I'm not having that conversation.
In other words,
I can see where it's happening.
In other words, those memes where they have, like, it's usually with basketball. They do it sometimes with football, where they'll have like the $5 category, the $4 category, the $3 category. Build your team. All right. And you'll be like, oh, build your team for $15. So Frank is in the $5 category. And Gracie is in like the $3 or $2 category. But you could be like, all right, well, I'll take Grace at first base and I'll feel okay as long as he's not the centerpiece of my team. And I'll take someone else because I really want Junior off this $5 rack.
Right.
So I'll take Junior over Frank. And I'll take Gracie over whoever your $2 right, whoever your $2 center fielder is, or your $2 right fielder. So it'd be like I'll take Junior and Grace over Frank and Tim Raines, or something like that.
Now for me, I just want to say, like, great points, and to me,
yeah,
awesome job, Jack, as always. And and it's like why. I think two things for me, though. It definitely explains why Frank got overshadowed in his career in the 90s, but I'm curious about why he's overshadowed now, one. And two, I think just from a Jose and I on the podcast, it's like, yeah, he wasn't the best slugger. He wasn't the best for average. But especially in a time where people are looking at hitting, his numbers are showing he's in an elite level of all-around hitters who can do it all. Frank's high up there.
Incredible.
And so that's where it's like, for the best all-around hitter at that time, Frank's in that discussion with, like, Bonds in the 90s, too. So that's why I want to make those 2 points, I guess, to, like, why he's still overshadowed in the city now, especially after all the steroid stuff and
Right.
sadly hurting Sosa, you know. And don't get me wrong, I loved watching Sammy, and it hurts. But like, do you think is he getting more love now post his career in your city?
No, I don't think he's getting. I don't think he's getting more love. I think it's kind of the same. And even though, like you guys mentioned that wonderful video of A-Rod and Pete Rose and Frank, and it's interesting, 2 cheaters and the clean guy.
Yeah.
And I know Pete Rose, was he a cheater? Whatever. He's got something, right? And A-Rod's got something, and Frank doesn't have anything. Frank is totally clean. And there's no comments about him as there shouldn't be. He was always that. You look at him in Auburn, he was always that big. He always had those skills, but he hasn't really translated beyond White Sox fans. And again, in the city, it's like the Bears are the Bears. The Bulls became massive. The Cubs are kind of. There are a lot of people who are annoyed by the Cubs. It's like if you're not a Cubs fan, you're like this fucking team. Like this is really annoying.
Look, we get that as Phillies fans. You know what I'm saying? Like they're hard organizations to love for sure.
Right. So that never really translated in any big way. And I want to talk you, and I'll try to do it fast. I want to talk you through the rest of the 90s. So 94, Frank's having this incredible season, and the White Sox are going to probably go to the playoffs, and then the strike happens. So he gets this incredible season wiped off the books. The strike, meanwhile, leads MJ to go back to the Bulls. So now Mike's back. Scotty's still there. We get Dennis Rodman, and now we're 72-10. And we're about to run the world again. And Frank misses out on what 94 could have been. And then for some reason he wasn't like a perennial all-star. Then he won the batting title in 97, but then he kind of had this dip. And meanwhile, you think about like how different ways that you're overshadowed. The White Sox then become overshadowed by Cleveland, because as good as the White Sox were, Cleveland went to the World Series in 95 and 97. And then the best player on Cleveland in 95 comes to the White Sox.
True. And he's a big personality.
He's a big personality. So that became a big thing. And then 97 he wins, Frank wins his batting title. And then what happens in 98? Not only is he overshadowed in baseball on a national level, but one of the people overshadowing him is on the team that's already overshadowing him in the same city.
With a huge personality.
Michael Jordan hit his last shot against Utah to win the 98 finals, and on the next day, Sammy hit 3 home runs. In the middle of his, I hit 20 home runs in June, all of a sudden it's Sammy and McGuire instead of Junior and McGuire. The very next day.
Absolutely.
So Frank, on June 14th, 1998, was overshadowed by Michael Jordan. And on the very next day begins the Sammy Sosa thing.
Absolutely.
That's a great point. Yeah.
The White Sox then shifted their marketing because they had all these young stars who were coming up. And in 1999, their slogan was, "These kids can play." Maglio Ordonez, Carlos Lee, Chris Singleton, a shortstop named Mike Caruso who didn't work out but was part of that group. So now, 98, 99, you've just come off a Bulls three-peat. Sammy Sosa is one of the biggest stories in baseball, and the White Sox have turned the pages into "These kids can play."
So moving on from Frank, like pretty much moving on from Frank Thomas.
Moving on from Frank. However, then the next year, the Sox win the division, and Frank is second in the AL MVP voting. And you guys talked about the ways in which the steroids era kind of messed with Frank. So we talked about the strike. The strike wiped out one of Frank's best seasons because it wiped out 1994, where he also won AL MVP. But what it also did was it put baseball back on its heels, put MLB back on its heels, and was like, all right, we got to do whatever we can do to make sure that fans come back in. And one of the ways that they did that was they were like, all right, now we've got these home run hitters. Let's embrace McGwire and Sosa. And who beat Frank Thomas for the AL MVP in 2000?
Mr. Giambi,
who was on steroids.
Yep.
So steroids keeps knocking Frank out from every direction. It knocks out his best season. It brings this huge competitor into his own market, and then it wipes out an MVP award that he would have won. So you would have had Frank winning MVP in 93, 94, and then in 2000. It would have created more of a sense of like the span of his dominance. And instead, he had this terrible postseason. White Sox get swept by Seattle. And then the White Sox don't do what they did in 2001. In 2000, they don't do it in 2001. They don't do it in 2002. And he starts battling injuries. And when's the next time the White Sox are relevant?
in 05.
In 2005. And Frank is now not he's like the Drew Bledsoe of that team. And it's like instead of the 2005 White Sox being like we got to win one for Frank, or instead of him being like the Walter Payton of that team, where it's like the team kind of exists around him, there's something happening that has nothing to do with him, but also he's like, finally win one for Walter, win one for Frank kind of a thing. Instead of that happening, Frank's out of the lineup, doesn't play a whole year, and he misses the postseason. So in what should have been the celebration, Frank Thomas finally wins a ring. I remember watching him in Houston. He was like smiling and celebrating, but it was like Carl Everett was like the DH. He didn't even have.
It was sad.
Paul Konerko is the power hitting first baseman in the middle of the order. Jermaine Dye is the guy who's coming up with the clutch hits. It's all these other guys, the pitching staff, Burley. Suddenly, Mark Burley and Konerko are the guys who are the OG White Sox who it's like win one for them. And then who's the manager of the 2005 White Sox?
Ozzie.
Ozzie. So it's a guy from the 93 Sox. So when there was conversation about this tie-in between, the 2005 White Sox and past teams, it's like, 93, Ozzie. But, it's not even Frank.
Jose, I think we got to appoint Jack here to help change that narrative. And I'm going to say this because we're, Jose and I, from Philly, and it's historic that the best Phillies player in Phillies history, Mike Schmidt, had a awful relationship with the Philly media and Philly fans in his time. Now, the greatest third baseman in baseball history, the best player in franchise history, it was a bad relationship when he was here. And he won 3 MVPs, led them to their first world title, but it was bad. But, and Jose, if you disagreed, or, let me know, but it's like, post his career and Mike getting in the Hall of Fame, that has really changed, where I think people wouldn't know that now, right, Jose?
No, I agree with that. And now, he does Phillies games, you know what I mean? Like, so he's now become like someone that the city really like cares about, right? And it's like almost you can't even believe, like when you hear those stories, you're like, no way. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and it's like, no, that's how it was with Mike Schmidt, and which is super unfortunate. But you kind of even my last question, right? I wanted to ask you, Jack, and it was like a good segue. I wanted you to bring up that 2005 team, and Deremy too. Jump in on this. If Frank Thomas has a Frank Thomas season in 2005, right, leads him to the playoffs, wins the World Series, is this narrative a lot different?
I think it's a lot different, and I think that there's still an aspect. Yeah, the White Sox are always just going to be the underdog in their own city. I'm 40 years old. I don't know what another 40 years of life would make me see it differently. I just think that's just what it is. The White Sox will always be the number 2 team in their own city, and it's not fair, but it is the truth. And it also imbues White Sox fans with a certain additional level of pride, because it's like, we're not here for anything other than the fact that we love the White Sox. It's like, oh, you go to Wrigley because you just want to get drunk and have a fun barbecue afternoon kind of a thing. And, you just like the Bulls because of MJ, but you're not really a Bulls fan and all that. Like, there's only one reason to like the White Sox, and it's because you like the White Sox. So I think that White Sox fans have a level of pride about that, as they should. But yeah, absolutely. Let's say Frank, all right, fine. It was like, if he wasn't going to be the man, but maybe he was going to be, active in the series, and maybe he was going to be like DH hitting sixth or something. So you're not depending on him for the numbers that he was putting up in the 90s. But yeah, like, imagine Frank getting, driving in Willie Harris instead of Jermaine Dye in Game 4. The White Sox won Game 4 1-0 to finish that sweep. What if Frank got that hit? Or what if Frank hit the grand slam that Konerko hit in Game 2? What if Frank had Scotty Pods' walk-off? What if Frank was the pinch hitter? All right, so Game 3 of the World Series went 14, 15 innings. And in the top half of the final inning, I think the 14th, Jeff Blum came up, and the White Sox had traded for Jeff Blum at the break, at the deadline, and he hit a pinch hit 2-run homer to right, and that was the difference in the Sox. I think the Sox won 7-5, and it's like, people remember the Jeff Blum game, the Jeff Blum moment. What if that was Frank's home run? Mm-hmm. Or what if just like maybe he didn't even have that one play, and this gets back to another element of him being overshadowed. He never, even though he hit well against the Blue Jays, he didn't have that signature play. Yeah. He doesn't have. Everybody can picture Ken Griffey Jr. scoring from first.
I was going to say that, yeah, the double by Edgar, 95.
By Edgar, exactly.
Against the Yankees for Griffey.
Exactly. Everybody can picture Jr. scoring from first. Everybody can picture Derek Jeter's flip. Everybody can, hell, Miguel Cabrera, he's not going to the Hall of Fame because of what he did with the Marlins, but he had some huge moments in 2003 with the Marlins. Pudge Rodriguez had some huge moments. I mean, these hurt me because I was a Cubs fan, so I was on the receiving end of all of those. But those are big, big, historic, iconic moments. Barry Bonds in the 2002 World Series. And even A-Rod had like that kind of comeback in 2009 with the Yankees, where he finally hit well. David Ortiz with the walk-offs, against the Yankees. Jose Bautista. I'm trying to think of ones that are a little bit more recent. I don't watch baseball like I used to, but
Frank's big moments came in Oakland when he had that comeback season. It came in Oakland, not Chicago.
Right. So yeah, exactly. What if Frank's comeback season had been 2005? And it's not like Paul Konerko was like light on his feet. So as much as that 2005 team was defined by the moves from, they went from Ordonez and Carlos Lee to Jermaine Dye and Scott Podsednik. So they got like smaller, faster, and that was part of that team. But it's like Paul Konerko's not part of that. He's just in the middle doing what he does. And like, I love Paulie. He was awesome. But yeah, what if Frank was Frank? What if Frank in 2005 was Frank of 2000 or Frank of 2006?
Right.
And I mean, it was 1 year, right? It was 2006. I'm not even going to look it up. It was 2006.
06.
It's 1 year later, and it boggles the mind. But yeah, I think that would have been different. I think if the 2005 White Sox were tied to Frank Thomas, then that would have been different. But it's really like that Drew Bledsoe situation. It's like watching Bledsoe celebrate Super Bowl 36 and just being like, yeah, we remember you. But like, even Bledsoe had the AFC Championship game. Frank doesn't even have his subbing in for Brady touchdown against Pittsburgh moment in 2005.
Very true.
He doesn't even have that.
No, that's true. Jack, you brought some great points, man. This was awesome.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on for sure.
And it was interesting. I think all three of us sports historians and love it, but I never would have connected the MJ factor and all these other factors if not for you right now, man. I got to give it to you. That was awesome.
Yeah, guys. Well, hey, I want everybody who's watching to know, especially people who are watching, because I shared this and I tweet this and I mean it, that this is bigger than the game, and listen, I'm a bigger than the game hipster. I was here when it was in the zone, baby.
That's right. Tell them.
These guys, Jose and Deremy, this is put it right in here. This is the best sports history podcast going right now. This is my favorite, and one of the best sports podcasts of any kind at all right now. And listen, I have a lot of friends who are near and dear to me who do sports shows, so it's no disrespect to anybody, and this might also just be my personal taste as well, but when I say it, I mean it. This is the best, bigger than the game with Deremy and Jose, the best sports history show now. 2022, and it was the best in 2021, and it was the best in 2020, and it'll be the best in 2030 when the earth is crumbling and all we have are our memories. So
yeah, we'll be going down with this shit for sure.
Yeah. So when I say it, I mean it. This is the kind of deep dive stuff that happens. I'm trying to look right into the Snowden camera right now.
Looking right into their souls.
Yeah.
It's working. You're convincing me.
Yeah, you're gonna start listening now.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
That's good. You do them and then you never listen to them afterwards. But yeah. Anyways, this is my favorite sports history show. It's the best, and so I'm honored every time I get to come and join you guys, and I love listening and appreciate you having me.
No, we those
Thanks,
words
Jack.
we couldn't. We appreciate it, man. Those are very kind words, and we connected with you from the start, and there's nobody we love to read and better to follow than Jack. So people follow at Read Jack because he brings those threads, he brings interesting points, great conversation that I'm always like, man, I haven't thought about that, or sometimes I'm worried. I'm like, that's gonna get me in trouble at work because I'm writing,
Right.
trying to join in on these threads and be like, what about this? What about that? Or Jack retweeted, so I'm like, man, good thing my boss ain't around. But we appreciate.
I've heard I get people in trouble at work. I've heard that.
It's hard. Sometimes I'm like, man, I want to jump in, but is she around? Yeah, she's around. Okay, I can't say it, but no, man, we just appreciate your knowledge, and most importantly, we appreciate you, man, and this is so much fun. And everyone, please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Bigger Game Pod, and wherever you listen to podcasts, please like, subscribe, check it out. You can check out our latest episode on Frank Thomas and hear what we said, and then it can connect this episode where Jack brought the Chicago perspective. But Bigger Than the Game with Deremy and Jose. And this is just the beginning, man. Jack kicked it off, but we're going to be bringing so many more podcast episodes and also YouTube episodes. So we're just pumped. So thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Jack, again for coming out, man. We really appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Appreciate you guys having me. And like I said, you guys now, I mean, everything you said was right, but I was just like, oh, there's just a few things that we need to hit upon because
good points,
it's
man.
that difference of having been there. I mean, I could
Sure.
do probably I could do a dope podcast about the 01 Sixers, but it wouldn't be the same as what you guys bring.
No, for sure, man. Jose,
Shout out to AI.
Jose, this is fun, man. We got our first one in the books for YouTube.
There you go. It's history. You're part of history, Jack.
I love it. Finally. not just reading about it.
Yes.
Part of it.
So for the amazing Jack Silverstein, for my tag team partner, Mr. Jose Ruiz, I'm Deremy Dove. Thank you guys for watching.
Peace.